The Life of David Livingston, Part 13. Before Dr. Livingston's departure from Lineatini, Sekeletu had sent forward couriers informing the various headmen of the tribes of the explorer's intended journey, and commanding that he be received with all due state of hospitality. Accordingly, all the wants of the party were kindly provided for. They had enough to eat and to spare, and the use of the best huts, plenty of skilled boatmen, and everything that could be procured in the country for their accommodation. Indeed, the commands of Sekeletu were sometimes so generously construed as to put Dr. Livingston to inconvenience by reason of excessive hospitality. Thus he was forced, as it were, to wait on one occasion till a certain great personage should pay him respect, and then go off on a journey to a considerable distance, accompanied by a guide, by a vigorous Amazon, a chieftainess of the region, and noted for great prowess of tongue and pedestrianism. Yeah. The doctor had no little difficulty in keeping up with either, but chiefly submitted to many good-natured inflictions because of the evident kindness and liberty of the people. On December 17th, the party reached Libanada. This village, near the upper part of the now narrowed Bartotse Valley, is built upon a mound and belongs to two women who were wives of Sebitine. They liberally supplied the expedition with food. This is the last town of the Mokololo, in front of a few hamlets and cattle stations and a vast expanse of border country. 10 days afterwards, the party reached the confluence of the Liambai and the Liba, and the former here flowing westward, the latter from the north. The journey was pursued up the Liba. Near the confluence of these rivers, game was exceedingly abundant, but Livingston's expectations in this regard were not sustained as he pursued his expedition. Near the confluence of these rivers, game was exceedingly abundant, but Livingston's expectations in this regard were not sustained as he pursued his expedition. The region to the north of the Mokololo country is called Londa, and its inhabitants Balanda. They worship idols and are extremely superstitious. They are thus described, quote, "The Balanda are real Negroes, having much more wool on their heads and bodies than any of the Buchwana or Kafare tribes. They are generally very dark in color, but several are to be seen of a lighter hue. Many are the slaves who have been exported to Brazil. Many of the slaves who have been exported to Brazil have come from this region. But while they have a general similarity to tropical Negro, I never could, from my own observation, think that our ideal Negro as seen in tobacconist shops is the true type." I have no idea what that means. The true typical Negro of tobacconist shops? No idea what that means. Doesn't sound good though. A large population of the Balanda, indeed, have heads somewhat elongated backward and upward, thick lips, flat noses, elongated ossa calcas, but there are also many good-looking, well-shaped heads and persons among them. End quote. Shinte, the chief of the Balonda, while exhibiting much kindness to Dr. Livingston and receiving him with great state, must have been much of a night hawk. He sent for the missionary at most unseasonable hours, till at length, on account of his fever, he had to decline going. If the Makololo ate like vultures, the Balonda slept on the wing. They are great pedestrians, even the women walking long journeys through the dense forests of these regions, which have scattered throughout numbers of the idols of the gross superstition of the people. The Balonda are given to much speaking in their kolta and are quite musical people, their instruments being drums and the marimba, a rude species of piano. The dress of the Balonda men consists of softened skins of small animals, as the jackal and wildcat hung before and behind from a girdle round their loins. The women were dressed in nature's toilet. But were not immodest. After leaving Shinte, the same flat forest country was met with and any quantity of rain. It doesn't fully make sense. After leaving Shinte, the same flat forest country was met with and any quantity of rain. The rivers and the gullies were full of the plains, and the plains drenched. In crossing the Lokalayuje, which flows into the Liba, the whole party was thoroughly wet through, but a few articles were kept dry by being held up by the guides and natives. On such occasions, Dr. Livingston carried his watch in his armpit, where it was preserved from the rains above the waters and above the waters below. With this superabundance of water, game became scarce, and the party often went hungry to bed. Here it was observed that all the streams of a vast extent of Central South Africa have their origin in oozy bogs, and not in fountains. Such is the case with the Shobe, the Leoti, Kayasi, and other rivers. About this time, the party heard about the death of Metyamvo, who had been a powerful chief, having life and death at his absolute control. He used to go about in person, beheading his subjects as he would meet them, because, as he said, they were becoming too numerous. The farther north Dr. Livingston proceeded, the more savage and superstitious did the people become. But the people under the chief Katamea are exceptionally amiable, and have a great love of singing birds, of which they have large numbers, similar to our canaries, that they kept in cages. On the 30th of March, 1854, after one of the most remarkable of journeys through savage lands, the party passed out of the confines of barbarism into a land inhabited by those who, if not civilized themselves, were subject to a civilized people. This was when the explorer entered the magnificent valley of the Kwango, which forms the eastern limits of Portuguese authority in this part of Africa. The Basinje tribe is on the east bank of the Kwango, and they treated the expedition with more inhospitality and threatened cruelty than it had received during thousands of miles of travel. On the west bank and between the river and lower Guyana proper, the territory of the Bangala and Kasanjay's subjects of the Portuguese. The following from Livingston's description of the Great Valley will give the reader a fine conception of a beautiful country within 10 degrees of the equator. Quote, on the 30th, we came to a sudden descent from the high land, indented by deep, narrow valleys over which we had lately been traveling. It is generally so steep that it can only be descended at particular points. Below us lay the valley of the Quango. If you sit on a spot where Mary, Queen of Scots, viewed the Battle of Langside and look down on the valley of Clyde, you may see in miniature the glorious sight which a much greater and richer valley presented it to our view. It is about 100 miles broad, clothed with dark forest, except where the light green grass covers meadowlands, and on the Quango, which here and there glances out in the sun, and it wends its way to the north. The opposite side of the great valley appears like the range of lofty mountains, and the descent into it about a mile, which measured perpendicularly, may be from 1,000 to 1,200 feet. Emerging from the gloomy forests of Londa, this magnificent prospect made us all feel as if a weight had been lifted from our eyelids. A cloud was passing across the middle of the valley, from which rolling thunder pealed, while above all the glorious sunlight. And when we went down to the part where we saw it passing, we found that the very heavy thunder shower had fallen under the path of the cloud, and the bottom of the valley, which from above seemed quite smooth, we discovered to be intersected by great numbers of deep-cut streams. Looking back from below, the descent appears as the edge of a tableland, with numerous indented dells and spurs jutting out all along, giving it a serrated appearance. Both the top and sides of the Sierra are covered with trees, but large patches of the more perpendicular parts are bare and exhibit a red soil, which is general over the region we have now entered. End quote. Detained some days on the Quango by rains and scientific observations, it was not until near the middle of April that Dr. Livingston reached Cassange, the farthest inland town of the Portuguese, and about 300 miles from the Atlantic coast at St. Paul de Londa. Thenceforward, until his arrival at Londa, Dr. Livingston met with unbounded hospitality and the distinguished consideration due to his discoveries and his sufferings and his labors in behalf of humanity and science. The commandments of the various Portuguese towns and trading posts through which he and his unique Mokololo companions passed showed him every attention and honor, whereby it is plain he was most highly gratified. His opinion of the Portuguese colonists as high-toned gentlemen is evidently very exalted, nor can he find words of too high praise in which to speak of the entire freedom of caste and social and business intercourse between the Europeans and Africans. He contrasts his customs here in Angola with those of Cape Colony, and greatly to the disadvantage of the English. He also has much to say in praise of the former labors of the Jesuit missionaries whose good results are still plainly observed among the natives, but regrets that they did not translate and leave the Bible for their instruction and guidance. Oh, goodness, the Jesuits didn't leave Bibles behind. They just instructed them, about Christianity without the Bible. He laments the visible want of internal improvements. There are no roads in the country, merely paths from place to place, with canoe ferries across the rivers and deep streams. He also laments the fact that the Portuguese do not bring wives to the colonies with them and become permanent citizens. It is true they raise families by native women and treat their children with great kindness, but the want of the family as an institution, founded in affection and sustained by law, must, so long as it exists, keep the colonists in this situation of mere traders and repress intellectual and moral development. So he has some problem with them marrying local women instead of bringing their own wives from Europe. Anyway, I don't know what that means or what he's getting at. When Livingston reached Loanda, he was still greatly suffering from the effects of his fever, by which he had been several times attacked. There was but a single Englishman in the town, and the missionary worried himself into his illness, wondering whether this sojourner were possessed of good nature or was one of those crusty mortals one would rather not meet at all. This gentleman, the sick traveler, goes on to say, Mr. Gabriel, our commissioner, for the suppression of the slave trade, had kindly forwarded an invitation to meet me on the way from Cassanage, but unfortunately it crossed me on the road. When we entered his porch, I was delighted to see a number of flowers cultivated carefully, and inferred from this circumstance that he was, what I soon discovered him to be, a real whole-hearted Englishman. Seeing me ill, he benevolently offered me his bed. Never shall I forget the luxurious pleasure I enjoyed in feeling myself again on a good English couch. After 6 months sleeping on the ground, I was soon asleep, and Mr. Gabriel, coming in almost immediately, rejoiced at the soundness of my repose. Under the hospitable roof of Mr. Gabriel, Dr. Livingston remained much longer than he had anticipated, for he continued for some time to grow more and more reduced under the effects of the disease from which he had long suffered. This was doubtless owing to the fact that he was now out of command, and the feeling of grave responsibility did not give that strength and elasticity of the mind which have so powerful an effect in countering bodily ailments. He was visited by a number of prominent Portuguese gentlemen. An acting governor of the province sent his secretary to offer his services of the government physician. Some British vessels also came into the port, offered to convey him to St. Helena or homeward, as he might choose, but there were his Macoloko friends, who had accompanied him a vast distance, and would be unable, without his assistance, to pass through the country of the unfriendly Negroes near the borders of the Portuguese colony. The explorer would not abandon his trusty friends to such a fate. He therefore declined the tempting offers of the naval friends, and came to the determination to return to the Mokololo chief, which, with the object of proceeding from this country to the east coast of Africa by way of the Liembai or Zambezi rivers, hoping thus to recover a route by which a wagon road to central South Africa might be opened up. This involved a journey across the continent through an unknown country, filled with wild animals, hostile tribes, and noxious malaria. That Dr. Livingston reached his determination while on a bed of sickness and importuned by kind friends to take his ease for a season in is that Dr. Livingston reached his determination while on a bed of sickness and importuned by kind friends to take his ease for a season is conclusive demonstration of his sublime conscientiousness and his indomitable spirit. That ends chapter 5.